The winter that nearly erased the mining camp in the Sierra Nevada did not begin with wind. It began with silence. A silence that settled into the narrow mountain pass long before the first snow fell. In the fall of 1888, high above the camp, where the unfinished rail line cut into the rock, a single freight car sat abandoned on a dead spur. Rust spread across its iron skin. Paint peeled away in long strips. When the temperature dropped, the metal rang, hollow, cold. To the miners below, it was nothing. Scrap left behind by a company that had failed before the line was ever finished. But to Margaret Gable, it was something else. It was shelter. Not because it was strong, not because it was warm, but because it was there. She arrived alone. No wagon, no horses. Only a German shepherd that stayed close at her side, and a trunk filled with wool blankets. From the slope below, the miners watched her. While they sealed their cabins with mud and pine branches, she climbed that ridge day after day, carrying sacks, dragging wood, hauling stones. Not out of the rail car, into it. At a distance, it didn't make sense. A widow moving earth into a metal shell. A woman choosing iron in a place where iron froze faster than wood. They said nothing at first. They just watched. But if anyone had walked closer, close enough to see what she was doing, they would have noticed something strange. She wasn't filling the space. She was measuring it. Carefully. Deliberately. From the inside wall of the rail car, inward. Every inch mattered. Because Margaret already understood something the others did not. You could not heat the rail car. Not all of it. 40 feet of iron would drain heat faster than any fire could replace it. Trying to warm it was a losing fight. So she made a different choice. She would not heat the space. She would reduce it. At the far end of the rail car, she marked off a section. 8 feet, no more. Then she began to build. Railroad ties dragged up the slope one by one, set into place, stacked, aligned, a wall. Then another. Between them, she left a gap. And into that space she packed everything she could find. Dry pine needles, loose wool caught on brush below the pasture, scraps, fibers, anything that would trap air. Her hands blistered, her back burned, but she kept working, because she wasn't building a room. She was building a barrier, a separation between herself and the cold. Kaiser stayed near her the entire time, watching the ridgeline, listening, as if he understood that something was coming. By the time the wall was finished, the rail car had changed. Not outside. From the outside, it was still the same rusted shell, still hollow, still exposed. But inside, there was a second space now. Smaller, contained, and separate from the iron around it. The miners noticed that part, and that's when the laughter started. Miller came first, broad-shouldered, confident. He leaned against the rail and looked inside. "You're sealing yourself in a coffin," he said. "Metal like that, it'll pull the heat right out of you." He gestured toward the empty length of the car. "You can't fight that." Margaret listened, then turned back to her work. Because she wasn't trying to fight it. She was trying to avoid it. By late November, the small room was finished. It didn't look like much. Wood, wool, canvas. Simple. But when she stepped inside, the difference was immediate. The iron walls still held cold, but the cold no longer reached her. And for the first time since she arrived, the space felt steady. Not warm, not yet, but controlled. And that was enough. Because winter hadn't arrived yet, but Margaret already knew it would. Margaret did not stop at the wall, because the wall alone was not enough. The iron beneath her feet was just as dangerous as the iron around her. Steel does not only carry cold, it delivers it. From the ground, upward, into the body. So she started with the floor. Branches came first, thick ones laid across the steel in a rough grid. Not nailed, not fixed, just placed. Above the cold, but not touching it. Between them, she poured ash. Dry, fine, pulled from old fire pits below the camp. Then sand, packed tight into every gap. Ash slows heat. Sand holds it. Together, they broke the direct path from metal to skin. Only then did she lay boards across the top, not to make it smooth, but to create distance. Always distance. Because distance meant time, and time meant survival. Then she turned to the walls again. Not the wood she had built, the iron she had not touched. Most people would have nailed boards directly against it, trying to cover the cold. Margaret did the opposite. She left space. She hung thick canvas, heavy and dark, a few inches away from the metal skin. Loose, not sealed. And into that hidden gap she packed dry vegetation. Needles, grass, wool scraps, anything that would trap air and hold still. Because she understood something simple. Cold travels fast through solid material, but slowly through still air. The wind would strike the iron would carry the cold. But before it reached her, it would have to cross a layer of nothing. And that nothing would stop it. The room changed again. Not warmer, not yet, but quieter. The sharp edge of the cold began to dull. Then came the bed, not placed, built, raised off the floor, higher than comfort would suggest, because cold air sinks, and she had no intention of sleeping inside it. Beneath the frame she stacked stones, river stones, smooth, dense. She had carried them up the slope one at a time, 40 in total, each one chosen for weight, for density, for how long it could hold warmth after the fire was gone. Because Margaret was not trying to create heat, she was trying to keep it. That was the difference. The miners burned logs, big ones, fast, chasing warmth as it disappeared. Margaret planned to store it. Each afternoon she lit a small fire outside, heated the stones slowly, then carried them inside, one by one, and placed them beneath the bed. By nightfall, they held enough warmth to last until morning. No roaring fire, no wasted fuel, just stored heat. And then she made one final change. The stove. Small, tin, nothing special. But the pipe, that mattered. Most men ran it straight up, through the roof, as fast as possible to get the smoke out. Margaret slowed it down. She ran the pipe sideways, along the inner wall, before letting it rise. Every inch of pipe inside the room was heat given back, not lost. When the miners saw that, they laughed again. "You'll choke yourself," one of them said. "You need draft," another added. Margaret didn't argue. She adjusted, tested, watched. Because for her, this wasn't theory. It was observation. She sealed every seam. Flour, water, ash, a paste. Rough, but when it dried, it hardened. Cracks disappeared. Air stopped moving. The room tightened. Controlled. Predictable. And still, they said she was wrong. The women came next, carrying food, concern in their eyes. "You'll be buried in there," one said quietly. "No one will reach you when the snow comes." Another glanced at the narrow space. "You're living like an animal." Margaret listened, then walked to the back wall, pointed to a small opening, cut high, shielded outside by a simple hood. "Warm air rises," she said. "It leaves here. Fresh air comes in below. I've accounted for that." They didn't argue, but they didn't believe her either. When they left, they spoke softly about grief. about isolation, about a woman building herself into something that didn't make sense. But Margaret wasn't guessing. She had been watching. The elk had already moved down the valley, earlier than usual. Moss thickened on the north side of the rocks. The air carried weight, a stillness that came before something larger. She finished her work without rushing, without panic, because she wasn't preparing for weather. She was preparing for a system. And systems do not fail all at once. They fail when the pressure stays, when the cold does not leave, when the wind does not stop. By the time the first snow fell, Margaret was ready. The miners were not, and the mountain was about to test both. The storm did not announce itself. No thunder, no warning, just absence. Birds vanished from the ridge. The wind stopped. For a few hours, the entire pass fell silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that settles before something breaks. Then the snow began. Light at first, soft, almost gentle. By nightfall, it wasn't. The wind returned, not as a breeze, as force. 60 miles an hour, cutting through the pass like a blade. Snow stopped falling downward. It moved sideways, driven hard against rock, against timber, against anything that stood in its way. The railcar took the first hit. Iron screamed under pressure. A high metallic shriek that echoed across the ridge. Inside, Margaret didn't move. She listened, measured, waited. Down in the camp, everything changed. Fires roared. Logs fed into stoves faster than they could burn. Men moved between cabins with scarves pulled tight over their faces. Snow climbed the walls. Drift after drift burying doors, blocking paths. Heat rose and vanished, pulled upward, ripped away by the wind. Inside the bunkhouse, the air stayed cold. Even with the fire pushed hard, even with every gap sealed, the system wasn't holding. They burned more and lost more. By midnight, wood was already disappearing faster than anyone had planned. And still, it wasn't enough. Back on the ridge, the storm wrapped itself around the railcar. Wind struck the iron shell again and again and again. But inside, the smaller room held. Margaret reached for the thermometer, held it close to the lamplight, read the number. 62 degrees. She didn't smile, didn't react. She just set it back in its place, because this was what she expected. The stones beneath the bed gave off steady warmth, not intense, not sudden, but constant. Kaiser lay curled near her feet, breathing slow, untroubled. She added a single piece of oak to the stove, watched it catch, then settle. No rush, no excess, just enough. Outside, the snow deepened. It climbed the wheels first, then the lower panels, then higher. Layer by layer, the rail car disappeared. From the camp below, it looked as if the mountain was swallowing it. But Margaret understood something else, something the others did not. Snow does not only bury, it insulates. As the drifts thickened, the violence outside began to change. Not weaker, but quieter, and lost its edge before it reached her. The iron no longer screamed. The sound softened, muted, distant. And inside, nothing shifted. The air stayed steady. The walls stayed dry. The system held. By the second day, the difference became clear. Down in the camp, men were already exhausted. Smoke poured from chimneys day and night. Wood piles dropped faster than anyone had prepared for. Faces turned hollow. Movements slowed. Because they weren't just heating. They were fighting. And they were losing. Up on the ridge, Margaret wasn't fighting anything. She sat, listened, waited. Every 6 hours she fed the system, not the fire, the system. A small piece of wood, a quiet adjustment. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. By the third day, the rail car was gone, buried beneath 10 feet of packed snow, invisible, silent. Inside, the temperature held, 58 degrees, steady, while the storm tightened its grip around the mountain. Margaret Gable sat inside it, not resisting, not chasing warmth, holding it. By the fourth day, the storm had changed. It was no longer just cold. It was pressure, constant, unrelenting. Down in the mining camp, the system began to break. Not all at once, piece by piece. A door frozen shut. A chimney clogged with packed snow. A fire that burned hot, but left the room cold. At Miller's cabin, the stove never went out. Not once. They fed it through the night, log after log. Still, the air never warmed. The heat climbed, then vanished, pulled upward and torn away. At the bunkhouse, men slept in shifts, not for rest, to keep the fire alive. Because if it died, even for an hour, the cold would take the room, and it would not give it back. Wood piles dropped fast, faster than calculation, faster than reason. Men began to ration, then to panic, because no matter how much they burned, they were losing more. The cold wasn't being pushed out. It was coming in, from below, from the walls, from the air itself. By the 5th day, faces had changed. Not just tired, hollow. Eyes sharp with something deeper. Fear. Because they understood something now. This storm was not passing quickly, and what they had was not enough. Then someone noticed it. Not the rail car, the smoke. A thin line, barely visible against the white, rising from the ridge. Too steady, too calm. At first, no one said anything, because it didn't make sense. No one could be up there, not in this, not alive. But the next day, it was still there. Same place, same thin line. Not thick, not desperate, just consistent. Miller saw it last, standing outside the bunkhouse, eyes narrowed against the glare. He followed the line upward, toward the ridge, toward where the rail car had been. His jaw tightened. "That's not right," he said quietly. No one answered, because everyone knew what he meant. If she had stayed, she should be gone. Buried, frozen, silent, not sending smoke into the sky. By the 7th day, the storm finally broke. Not gradually, suddenly. The wind dropped, the sky cleared, and the world stood still under a weight of white. The camp emerged slowly, doors forced open, paths dug out, men stepping into the light with stiff movement and empty eyes. 2 cabins had collapsed. One man had lost fingers to frostbite. Was nearly gone. And still, the ridge remained. Silent. Buried. Except for one thing. The smoke. Still rising. Thin. Steady. Miller didn't wait. He gathered 4 men, not for rescue, not anymore. They all believed they were too late. They went to confirm it. The climb was slow. Snow reached their thighs. The air still cut through wool and skin. Every step, effort. Every breath, sharp. When they reached the ridge, they stopped. Because the rail car was gone. No shape, no outline. Nothing but drift. Except a single piece of metal pipe breaking through the snow. And from it, that same thin line of smoke. Miller stared at it, longer than he meant to. "There's no way," he said. But he stepped forward anyway. They began to dig, shovels cutting into packed snow, heavy, dense, until metal rang beneath it. The sound echoed through the frozen air. They cleared the door. Ice sealed it shut. It took all four of them to wrench it open. The rail car interior was exactly what they expected. Dark, frozen, bitter cold. Their breath filled the air. Frost clung to the walls. Their boots struck steel, hard, loud. "Maggie!" Miller called. His voice echoed down the empty shell. No answer. Only silence. At the far end, they saw it. A wooden wall. A door set into it. Closed. Miller stepped forward. Slow. Heavy. He raised his hand, ready to knock, and just before his knuckles touched the wood, the door opened. Warm air touched his face. Not a blast, not a rush, just presence, like stepping into sunlight after days in shadow. Miller didn't move. For a moment, he couldn't, because nothing about it made sense. The rail car behind him was frozen solid, but through that door, there was warmth. Real warmth. Margaret stood there, calm, steady, a simple sweater over her shoulders. Her face, not pale, not strained, alive. Kaiser rose beside her, tail moving once against the wooden frame. "You're warm," Miller said. It was all he could manage. Margaret nodded. "Come in," she said quietly, "before the cold takes more from you." They stepped inside, one by one, and the difference was immediate. Outside, the air cut. Inside, it held. No wind, no draft, no panic. Just a steady, controlled warmth. The stove burned low, not roaring, not desperate, just working. Beneath the bed, the stones still gave off heat. Slow, consistent. One of the younger men knelt, pressed his hand to them. "They're holding it," he whispered, "like the ground itself." Margaret watched him. "They don't create heat," she said. "They keep it." Miller stepped further in, ran his hand along the wall. Canvas, soft, separated from the iron. "There's space here," he said. "Yes." "The cold hits the metal first," she replied. "Then the air, then the insulation. By the time it reaches me, it's already lost." He looked at the pipe next, running sideways along the wall. You made the smoke stay longer. Margaret gave a small nod. Every inch of pipe is heat. I don't let it leave too quickly. Silence settled in the room. Not awkward, not heavy, just real. Because they understood now. Not all of it, but enough. How much wood? Miller asked, his voice lower this time, quieter. 3 logs a day, she said. The number stayed in the air. No one spoke, because they knew what it meant. Down in the camp, they had burned through nearly everything in a week, fighting the cold, losing more each hour. And here, in 8 feet of space, she had outlasted the storm, not by burning more, but by losing less. They stayed longer than they meant to, gloves off, shoulders lowered, breathing steady again. For the first time in days, no one felt like they were running out of time. When they stepped back out, the cold hit hard again. Sharp, immediate, like a reminder. Miller turned once more before climbing down the drift. We thought you were burying yourself, he said. Margaret stood in the doorway, warm light behind her. I was, she answered. In insulation. A few of them laughed, but not the way they had before. This time, they understood, and the mountain remembered. The next winter changed everything. Cabins did not grow bigger. They grew smaller inside. Rooms within rooms. Walls within walls. Air held still. Heat held close. They stopped chasing warmth. They started keeping it. They called it Gable's envelope. Margaret never named it, never claimed it. When people asked, she answered simply. I watched, she would say. The animals don't fight winter. They work with it. Years passed. Storms came again, but fewer cabins failed. Fewer fires were pushed to desperation. Fewer faces carried that hollow fear. And up on the ridge, the railcar remained, rusting, a shell around something no one had believed in, until it worked. Margaret Gable did not survive because she was stronger. She survived because she paid attention. She saw where heat escaped. She closed that gap. She stored warmth when it was available and protected it when it mattered. She did not fight the storm. She stepped inside it and made it smaller. Because in the end, survival is not about the fire you build. It's about the heat you refuse to lose.